Okay, welcome to another episode of The Influential Nonprofit. I have a guest today. Her name is Emily Taylor. She's the principal of teenyBIG, and she's an expert listener who is passionate about helping nonprofits find better ways to engage the people who matter to them. And I am so excited to have her here because anybody who listens to this podcast knows a lot of what I teach and train people to do is to stop pitching and start listening. Right? Emily guides teams into stepping outside of their day-to-day expertise in order to create stronger connections with their audiences, turning lackluster followers into enthusiastic supporters. I am for all of those things. I am so excited. Welcome, Emily.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Okay, I always start with the first question, which is, tell me something that you're proud of that you don't get to brag about a lot.
Oh, let's see. I guess just, being a good listener. I know I'm talking about that a lot, but it's taken me a little while to just realize just how proud I am of that skill of like really sitting down and listening to not just what people are saying, but how they're reacting and feeling in a certain situation. So it's been one of those things. I came from I was very shy growing up, and so maybe on a double note, I'll say that my other proud thing is that I'm so proud I've been able to get out and talk to people too, even though I do a lot of listening.
Right. So I was just going to ask you how you developed your listening skills. So maybe that was as a kid.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it's a little twofold. So like I said, I grew up very shy and really wanted to connect with people. And so one of the ways I did that was just listening to what people were saying and then finding what I wanted to talk about and connecting it to them. So I'd listen for the words that they were talking about, what excited them, and then be able to, change my wording to, what was hot in the playground and what connected with people. But over time, I grew to a career where I worked in the for-profit world doing a lot of consumer research. And so we would develop new packaging ideas and get them in front of people, go into people's homes, watch how they use them, sit behind a one-way mirror and ask people questions about what they thought about things. And so it really forced me to listen in a different way, into a more commercial way, but build that strategy for like, what do you do with that listening, and how do you pull apart the complexity of people and sort of the nuance for what they talk about and turn it into something real.
Okay, that is awesome. So also, like, I started recording and then my dog just decided to really start barking. So we're gonna roll through this. I remember when I was growing up, we got like that food, we got like test food, and we like were part of some kind of focus group thing. And that just brought back that memory. We would get this food and then we would have to like give feedback, but I don't remember people coming into our home, but I do remember like having to give feedback about the food and how it tasted and all that stuff.
Yeah, it's been fascinating. I've worked on, liquor projects, on, diaper projects, all these things where, people aren't used to talking about them, but you have to, go in and find ways to get that real perspective out of it. Because if you just sit there and ask people, do you like this?
Yeah.
They don't always answer honestly. And so the more you can really replicate those situations, you can get closer to real responses.
Yeah. So how did you get to the nonprofit world?
Sure. So I've always had a foot in the door of the nonprofit. I've done a lot of volunteering. I think I'm just as part of listening, I'm just really passionate about helping people. And so I've been on a lot of boards and volunteer work. And about 5 years ago, I had an opportunity to do a parallel shift where I took my design background and moved into a nonprofit role of helping local manufacturing. And so we would run these workshops where designers and manufacturers would get together, and we would create new ideas that would work with the capacity of a local manufacturer. So that started to get me into this nonprofit area of, job creation and equity. And so that I just loved that world. Like everyone I was around was really trying to do great things. And so I wanted to stay and be in it. And so I spent a couple of years just exploring, like, how do I use this consumer research knowledge and this passion for helping people? How do I, create a niche around that? And so that's where strategic listening came out of.
Great. So then how do you then help nonprofits learn to listen? And are they surprised that they're not good listeners?
That's actually probably one of the biggest challenges, to understand that they aren't listening, and the benefits of listening. I think sometimes people, nonprofits are busy and listening takes time. And so it's sort of like it can feel like a too many cooks in the kitchen situation. So what I help nonprofits do is, sometimes I'll do the listening for them, because there is a benefit to being outside of an organization and people being able to give you honest answers when they don't, have a tie to your mission or want to be nice to you. And
right. Don't want to disappoint you or, but yeah, because they're going to have to see you later. And they're like, oh, I don't want to say that because next time I see you, it's going to be awkward or something.
Yeah. So whether it's helping plan for working around some of those things, like how do you get honest answers? How do you put together the questions that will actually get you what you need, versus just having a conversation with people? How do you make people feel comfortable and welcome in a situation so they can be honest? And really, like, how do you get around some of the ways that people behave when they're asked questions? Like, do you ask questions in a few different ways so that you can confirm an answer versus, if someone is just talking to you about your program, they might really know how they feel. They haven't really thought about it. And so there's just ways to get into that and help get to those real answers. So I'll help organizations by doing the work, helping them plan the work, and then also coaching. So more of a long term.
Right. So they can increase their listening skills right after you've done working with them, because that's what we really want. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, the one thing I always want to get across is that, everyone can listen. There's different levels of how much you can get out of there. But any listening is great place to start, and you want to be doing it continuously. One annual survey is not really going to make a difference in the amount of feedback you're getting, especially when things are changing so much
right
in the last couple of years.
And so what do you feel like is the best benefit in the nonprofit culture to adopting more listening?
Can you say that the best benefit?
Like what's the biggest benefit to a nonprofit by adopting, and listening more?
I think the benefits are usually twofold. I mean, one, you get valuable information about how someone perceives your organization, but you also get a sense of participation. So people, hopefully more than just feeling they're a part of something, but they're actually being a part of your organization. So, when we give feedback to something, if we're filling out a survey for a shoe that we bought, we feel a little more invested in the company that is creating it. So those are the two benefits. And some of the things you can get out of it is you can get, words and phrases that people use, what stories really resonate with them about your organization. And you can also get, how did people come into your organization? And so can you, learn from what people are currently doing to then bring more people in?
Right. So before I started this business, I worked at this company called 501 Creative for 16 years. And one of the things that I did was my title was strategist and resident extrovert. So because I worked with, like I would say more quiet designers and web developers, but I would go in and I would do these things called discovery sessions. And basically it's kind of what you're talking about. Like I would get a group of people together and talk about how they thought and felt about the organization, like, you know, like, and it wasn't the questions that people thought I would ask, like, and I see where you're coming from, because like, if I say, you know, how do you like to be communicated with? Like, people may not know that, but, or like, so if we're going to do some theming, like, they wanted me like, what's a good tagline? Like, no, that's not the question that we're asking. The question we're asking is like, how do you feel about the organization? What words, do you think of, because we're looking for those words and phrases to stimulate the discussion that would eventually become a main message or a tagline or something, but it always started in these groups. And I got to be like very good at facilitating these conversations. And that was one of the values that someone like you and I can bring, is because we're sort of neutral observers, right? Like, I don't care what your opinion is, as long as I hear, you know what I mean? Like, you can think whatever you want, and I'm totally okay with that. The whole point was just drawing this information out of people. And I remember there's several times that somebody said something, like one time this woman walked in the room and she looked at me, this was like for an organization, a summer camp. She's like, because this is just way more than camp. And I wrote that down, and that became this whole campaign. Like, people would say these amazing things in the room, and we would come back and like, they go, so you just sit here and listen to us and then come back with ideas? I'm like, yeah, pretty much, because we could hear because we were listening for those like very specific nuggets of, you know what I mean? Like, and we hear it and we're like, oop. And so we come back like, hey, these are your words. We're just like calling them out and bringing them to life. That was, and people were, because I believe that the answers are always in the room, right? I believe that all the all we have to do is pull it out of you. Like, everything we need is in the room. So that was always so fun to do those.
I think we're coming from similar backgrounds then, because that was what I used to do in the for-profit world, was do that research so that we could create something, a package for people. And here it's just, it's really searching for what matters to people, and not just getting them talking, but like, what did you do? What were your behaviors before? Like, you were talking about social media. It helps just be like, well, what have you done this week? Ask people about their behaviors and understand them, and listen for the words that they use. Like, I recently did a project with like a sustainable transportation nonprofit, and they've been around a long time, and we're using very careful words around what they did, and they weren't bringing in a younger audience. So I reached out and talked to people that were following them on Twitter, and part of that age group, and they use like, fossil fuels was a word they just used over and over again, and climate change, and things that maybe weren't always a part of this organization's vocabulary. But without that, what this organization felt like stronger language, they weren't going to connect with this newer audience. And so they had to kind of build in, find ways to still keep their older audience, but also be a little more impactful, so that they could connect with that newer audience and the words that we were hearing, the stories they were telling us about.
Yeah. So is most of the work that you do like around groups, surveys, groups of people, or do you also do like individual? Like, how can we be better listeners in like in one-on-one conversations like this?
Yeah, one-on-one I usually find is the best to really get to the why. You can do surveys and get a little more general information, broader information from a wide variety of people. Focus groups is kind of in the middle, but one-on-one, like I said, asking people about, I guess it depends on what you're doing. So I know a lot of work revolves around gaining donors, and so I will, ask people, how did you first know about this organization? What was your first step? What do you most remember interacting with this organization? Why does that matter to you? And really following up with some of these whys. And why is one of those questions where it's a little vague, but it's also open and just gets people taking that next level deeper into thinking about why they behaved in a certain way. And so I think that's why it's one of those really important questions in those interviews. And then coming in and maybe asking in a few different ways, how did people take a next step with an organization? What do they most remember? Because those memories represent the things that were most powerful to them, even if they're, we tend to not remember, the chicken sandwich we had every day for lunch, but we remember the one time it was bad, or the one time we got it for free, or so we remember the ups and downs, and those are really where I recommend people focus, because that helps build someone's story about your organization.
I think a lot of, before I say that, I want to ask you this. So what could I do, or what could the listeners of this podcast do to just start listening or being a better listener, like right now? Like what wisdom could you have around that?
Yeah, I'll to share my YouTube channel with you, because I've got tons of good content on there. But I have like some videos on some short tips, but some suggestions I make is just start building listening into what you're doing. So if you're posting on social media, make sure you're asking questions and listening to those responses. It's a great opportunity to just get some quick feedback from people and get them to engage more with your social media. If you have a program, leave some time at the end for questions. Ask specific questions. What do you guys love most about our organization, or what made you come tonight? Those kind of things are great ways to sneak in some listening. Doing very short surveys in your e-newsletters.
Okay, all right.
Just like a 2 to 3 thing, where maybe you can even give them a little, some fun fact. Did you know that our organization is, the top, producer in our field, or whatever it might be. And so you give them a little, and then also get back a little. What have you loved most about what we've done over the past year?
Right. Yeah.
Those kind of things, and you can get those little bits of feedback, and you're always it's building engagement, but it's also giving you information.
Yeah. All right. So here's the other thing, and I mentioned this to you a minute ago. I coach and train people in this course that I teach. One of the things that I introduce them to is having a fundraising conversation that I call a courageous conversation, but that's rooted in listening. Okay, so I know you've got your brochure, and your talking points, and like I worked really hard to make those things for people. So like those are okay things to have. And those are secondary, and just having this conversation around, first of all, like releasing the outcome, which means like releasing the expectation, right? And just seeing you for who you are and not for who I want you to be, right? Because that's where our pain lies, in that gap. And then just opening myself up to who you are. All I need to do is witness. And what I mean by witness is like, I just receiving what you're saying. I don't have to fix it, change your mind, just like read this, like opening up this receptivity. And the reason that this is so important is because we were taught to pitch, right? We're like, you got to sell it. You got to go in there and you got to, tell them, okay, I need to convince them how amazing we are so that they will give us money. And it's actually the opposite. I just need to see you and help you feel seen and heard. My only job is to have you feel seen and heard. Right. And once I do that, then you'll trust me. And then you'll be open to what I have to say, which is the opposite of I think what we think we're supposed to be doing. But in any conversation, I always want to go second. Like that's my goal, right? That's how I establish the flow. I want to hear from you, and then I'll share about me, and then we'll see where it goes. Like that's the standard that I set, because how can I figure out where you fit in if I don't know anything about you?
Yeah, and I think it's changed, over the last decades, and maybe that's why we've been taught that way to pitch, to sell, to get out there. And it's certainly, people have to know you. But one of the things I really believe is, like, you have to know who you're talking to, and you're not going to know unless you listen to people. I see a lot of talk out there of like, oh, this is a good message, or these are great examples. And I honestly believe, like, there could be a perfect pitch that worked for one organization that's not going to work for another organization, even if you just pop out the right adjectives. Because, is your organization, do they want to be very casual and friendly with you? Do they want you to be prim and proper and provide lots of statistics? Like, you kind of have to build a community and talk to that community. And it might be several communities. You don't have to just limit yourself to one, but this idea of talking to everybody falls flat because we're used to, all these companies reaching us in different ways, and that feel like they're meeting us where they are. And I think the same is true for nonprofits.
Yeah. Like, even when we were at 501 Creative, like, I'm really tapping into this right now. People would say, oh, can you come pitch? Or like, yeah, that's not really what we do, but we're kind of a sit around the table and solve problems kind of place. Like, we're not, like, they wouldn't want us to, like, what, like, the dog and pony show. And we're like, yeah, it doesn't benefit you or us to do that. But what we do want to do is, like, really listen to what's going on. And so we can figure out the best way to support you. And I do feel like, because that's what people, I think you're right. Like different people have different expectations. And I also think in listening, that, about like a donor, or like they might not be the right fit for you, and that's okay. But in that listening, you can really make good aligned relationships. And, because I do feel like the reason that we're taught to pitch is that it works. I think it works in the short term. It doesn't work in the long term as far as establishing community and, like you said, engagement, like overall engagement. And I think that, hopefully that is shifting, but like, oh yeah, we got to go in there and, sell, yeah. close.
Or this idea that, like, if I just create this perfect message, it's going to work for everybody. And that's where I just think that the mindset shift needs to happen. Is it's not a one size fits all t-shirt. It's, the style that works for your audience. And so what is that, what brands might go and, pitch on lifestyle and things like that. Like, as a nonprofit, why do your people care about your work, and how can you teach them in different ways and engage with them in different ways? And you have, in order to learn that, you have to listen to what's exciting them about your work and what do they not know. So one of the things I like to think about a lot is, there's this tendency in listening to be like, oh, well, someone said our program needs to be Tuesdays, so let's move it to Tuesdays. And that's not the goal of listening, to do what everything that the person that's talking says. The goal is to listen to that, acknowledge it, and make sure people feel that they've been listened to and that you've heard it and aren't just going to throw it away. But then also to see how that fits into your mission. So if moving this program isn't really the right thing for you, you can then use it. That's an education moment. It's a way to say, we'd love to be more flexible, but this is, we really want to do this great work, and this is why we need to have our program be this way.
Okay, I love what you said about that. And that is so great, because listening does not mean, right, like it's a directive. Like, I was working with somebody on empathy, and the person she felt like whatever they said she had to do or fix. I'm like, no, that's not, like, acknowledging it. That's input, that's information, right? That's not a directive. And hey, I was part of this discovery session, and we were working on naming a giving society. And in the course of this conversation, somebody started to say, that tagline, I they were starting to talk about the tagline, and now all of a sudden they're like going to change the tagline. And I was like, no, whoa, like, let's reel it back in here. Like, we're going to name this giving society. That's our job today. Like, literally, they started going into the tagline, and like, maybe it's not working, and maybe we should rethink that. And which the tagline was fine. Like I think the issue was it just hadn't been around long enough. It just takes a while for stuff to catch on, right? And I had to reel them back in, because like, if I would have been like, oh, okay, now I got to change the tagline because they told me to, or they didn't like it. Like, that's just information that then, okay, all right, we may want to do some educating around, marketing and implementation. And just because people don't know about it yet doesn't mean it's not a good idea, kind of thing, which is what I recommended. But I remember that conversation because it's like, if I would have taken that as directive, I would have gone back and said, well, we need to change the tagline. So.
Yeah. It's making me think of, I worked on a healthcare project where we interviewed doctors about reaching out to patients and really trying to understand what were the gaps that, it was a communications project. What were the gaps in communication that weren't happening, weren't bringing people into the doctor's office after a year and a half of COVID. And yeah, the doctors all had their ideas. They're like, I can picture this. It's like there's a person and they're surrounded by, COVID bubbles and things like, and we're like, okay, that's great. But, as my team, we just realized, like, there's certain things you just can't do because people are going to have a different reaction to it. And so, but we can still extrapolate the information that, people were scared, like that. Yes. And right. They felt like fear was going to motivate people. So how do we take that kind of high level, feedback and then turn it into something that fits the mission, fits the people that we're talking to? It kind of like, a interview, you can really talk about meaning and depth and feelings, things you've done in the past, and then you take that and have to mix in all the complexity of what's realistic, what resources right. do we have, what's our mission. So there's definitely I think that's the strategic part of listening that I do, is figuring out how to take those insights and turn them into not just what they said, but what's going to help your organization, what's going to bring in that donor group, what's going to help people increase.
And so that's kind of your magic then, is taking all of this information, all this feedback, and then translating that into something the organization can, decide what part of this feedback are we going to use and how are we going to use it? Like, what is the story it's telling us? Then how can we implement that story, like implement those changes?
Yeah. I love making organizing chaos. The feedback that you can get can kind of be messy, but you find the patterns in it, and find the meaning in it, and do it in a way that then you can actually do something with.
Yeah, I think typically in the work I do, even because I still do these sessions and stuff now, is there's always some kind of consensus. There's always some kind of pattern or some theme that emerges, like through you talking to different people in different aspects. And there's always, for me anyway, like there's something, like you see these patterns you see across different audiences, and like that's where the gold is, right? Because those threads that weave through everyone, that's where I feel like you can do a lot with, because these are common touch points that everyone, that that everyone has, that you can really expand on.
Yeah, that's actually something I run into a lot. I think there's a bit of a barrier where people think, well, I've got a big audience, 10,000, 100,000 people. How can I listen to all of them? Right. And that's actually something that in research, I've actually been reading a book on design sprint, which is like prototyping and testing ideas within a week. And I've run a few of those, but there was a group called the Nielsen-Norman group, and they actually found that you get 85% of your major feedback within talking to 5 people. And so it's, I tend to think that 5 people have to be very specific. So for instance, if you're looking at, non-members becoming members, how do you find people who are in that like potential member group?
Yeah.
But you start to see big big patterns in what motivates people, why they care very quickly. And so whether you're just talking to them or you're showing them different ideas that you have, you don't have to talk to a ton of people to get really useful feedback.
I think that's sometimes a concern that I get, and that you might get too, like, oh, have we talked to enough people? Have we talked to the right people? And I feel like the underlying issue that's happening there is like, if you're a kind of a risk averse personality type, there's never going to be enough information to make you feel comfortable, right? But like, okay, if I just talk to one more person or another, this group or this, right, then I can like have enough information where I feel comfortable. But it's really not about the information, it's about your level of comfort. Anyway, it's about your level of comfort. I just heavy sighed because somebody just came into my house.
I can hear the barking.
Yes, it's the contractors working. So what was I saying? I'm so sorry. We'll get this.
Yeah, you get concerned, like you just need to talk to more people.
So, and I just got that feedback like yesterday. Somebody it's like, I don't think we talked to enough people. Like, is this really an okay direction to take? And what I know, it's like, yes, acknowledging that, but also knowing that it's really not about the number of people. It's about this resistance, like, because there's some hesitation, because there's some pretty deep fear about the changes that we want to implement. And so I think there's because I really love what you said, because like your 85% comes from 5 people, because I've always witnessed that to be true. And yet other people are like, is this really enough to make these big decisions on? Don't we have to have like a bunch of broad-based stuff? It's like, kind of no. I mean, because what happens is you can just get tied up into just listening without asking. And then I think the other group is, I'm afraid to ask because I'm afraid of like all of the, like you said, the chaos of all the opinions coming at me. If you're kind of a pleaser type, you're going to feel like, oh, I have to make all of these things okay. Like if I'm going to hear them, then I have to like make them okay. Like I have to fix or solve whatever people bring up. And so they'll block that way. And then the other block is, oh, but if we do this, there's just never going to be like, how do I know what I'm doing is right? When do I talk to enough people? And so I think there's a balance in the middle, but what I'm hearing from you is not really that many. Like really, not really that many.
Yeah. I mean, I'll say I tend, like in my projects, I tend to talk to about 15 people. And so we find like 3 groups of 5. And so we're getting feedback, from slightly different categories of people. But you're right. It's, you got to kind of right size it to the challenge. If you're trying to do something that touches, everyone in your audience, then you might need to talk to more people and group them a little bit. But if your goal is to like, we need to, our younger audience needs to grow, we need to diversify our members, then you know exactly who you need to talk to and you can get to it pretty quickly.
So this has been amazing. Is there anything else you want people to know about listening and nonprofit, and how they can, I feel like what you're doing is creating a culture of listening. You know what I mean? Like, because weaving it into all these aspects, like your social media, your newsletter, all, your board meetings, like weaving that into everything that you do. Like, is there anything else you wanted to share about that?
Yeah, I think it is true. Like creating a culture within your organization is really great, because then you're listening from different angles. And one of the things that I really try to get people to think about is that people, they don't know everything you do about your organization. So by talking to them and listening to them, you can learn what they don't know. And so if your whole organization is focused on filling that gap of information they don't yet have, that you can really do so much, rather than just talking your expertise and being an expert at whatever your social media, your donor relations. If you can, get your organization to all be listening, you're going to be in a much better place to get the right information out there, engage people, and get them to understand why they need to support your organization, why they need to get more involved.
I love that. I think there's so much benefit to really having those ears open all the time. I think you'll be surprised at how much you learn when you're willing to listen and receive it, Okay, now here's my last question. So you're in Chicago, I'm in St. Louis. You're not far from me. So now you said you're a shy kid. I don't know if you're still shy, but I love karaoke and I love to go sing karaoke. So if we were ever at a karaoke bar together, say I roll into Chicago, we wind up at karaoke, what would be your go-to song?
I actually love karaoke.
Yes.
So we will definitely do that. There's a bar down the street from me that does karaoke, and I love "Hunk of Burnin' Love" by Elvis Presley.
Nice. Oh, that's awesome. I love that.
It's my kickoff karaoke.
And I love karaoke. It's my favorite form of self-expression. And so what is the bar down the street from you?
It's called Alice's.
Is it super divey?
Small.
Yeah.
Yeah, super divey.
Those are my favorites.
Karaoke actually, I think what made me realize I actually enjoy sharing my ideas with people. So
really,
I put a lot of love for karaoke.
I know, right? People, it gets a bad rap, but it's like I feel like it's like the modern day era of like sitting around a piano and singing. Like that's what it feels like to me. It's just
it's the closest I can get to performing because I have no other performance skills.
It's just like, I just love just getting out, like for me, I just love like letting my wild woman come out and just like singing all this, like, stuff. Like I love singing like Pink, but I can only sing one Pink song a night because then my voice starts to go, because she's like an actual singer, So I can't really do that too much, but I just love like just letting it loose. It's like my favorite thing. So yes, I get so much like energy
the opposite
out
of listening, but it's fun.
It is. And also the best places though are the ones where people do like listen, like they're in for the experience. Like this place by me, they closed, but it used to be like 2 stories and the karaoke was upstairs. So the people who didn't want to be a part of that were downstairs. The people who did were upstairs, which was awesome because the people were upstairs, like they were in it, they had this little stage, and it was like so fun because people did listen, and that's also a thing, is like being a good karaoke person is also listening, and cheering people on, and like supporting them, and that's what makes it such a great experience.
I always find my role in karaoke is to be the starter, like no one signed up yet. I'm like, all right. And then once the list starts to fill up, I back off. But I like to do the more like,
you like to get the ball rolling.
Started. Yeah.
I love it. I was in Tampa with my coach in the group that I'm a part of with her, and we were done with this big thing. We went to this karaoke bar, and this woman in my group, she says, "Oh, do you come here all the time?" I said, "No, I live in St. Louis." She goes, "Well, how do you know everybody here?" It's like, it's a karaoke bar. We're all friends. We just haven't met each other yet.
Yeah, it's the community.
Yeah, it is the community. All right, Emily, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for sharing about listening. The YouTube videos that you mentioned, we have those links in the show notes so everybody can go to the YouTube and check out those videos. And how else can people get in touch with you if they're interested in learning more about what you do and how you can help their organization listen?
Sure. I'm always very active on LinkedIn, so you can find me there. And you can always go to teenyBIG.com and set up a time to talk with me if you have questions about listening in your own organization.
All right. Thanks. And this has been another episode of The Influential Nonprofit. If you're new to this podcast, go to theinfluentialnonprofit.com and download your influencer starter kit. And I did mention how I work with people on having a conversation rooted in listening. And the template that I use for that is actually part of that download. So if you want to know the exact script that I use to coach people from to have these conversations rooted in listening, you can get that there. And I will see you next time on The Influential Nonprofit.